More than 2,500 years have passed since the kind teacher, Buddha Sakyamuni, taught in India. He invited all who wished to listen to examine what he had to say for themselves. He addressed different groups of people over a period of more than 40 years. After the Buddha's passing, a record of what he said was preserved as an oral tradition. Those who had heard the teachings would meet with others for communal recitations of what they had memorized. In due course, these recitations were written down, laying the basis for all subsequent Buddhist scriptures. The Pali Canon is one of the earliest of these written records, and the only complete early version that has survived intact. Within it, the texts known as the Nikayas have the special value of being a single cohesive collection of the Buddha's teachings in their earliest form. These teachings cover a wide range of topics. They deal not only with renunciation and liberation, but also with the practical matters of ordinary life. What I most appreciate is the vastly expanded opportunities people now have to acquaint themselves with the full range of Buddhist teaching and practice. This book shows clearly how much all schools of Buddhism share at their core. I congratulate Bhikkhu Bodhi for this careful work of compilation and translation. I offer my prayers that readers may find advice here, and the inspiration to put it into practice, that will enable them to develop inner peace, which I believe is essential for creating a happier and more peaceful world. Venerable Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, May 10, 2005. Preface. The Buddha's discourses preserved in the Pali Canon are called suttas, the Pali equivalent of the Sanskrit word sutras. Although the Pali Canon belongs to a particular Buddhist school, the Theravada, or School of the Elders, the suttas are not exclusively Theravada texts. They stem from the earliest period of Buddhist literary history, lasting roughly 100 years after the Buddha's death, before the Buddhist community divided into different schools. The Pali suttas have counterparts from other early Buddhist schools now extinct. These texts are often strikingly similar to the Pali versions, differing mainly in setting and arrangement but not in doctrine. Together, these are the most ancient records of the Buddha's teachings available to us, the closest we can come to what the historical Buddha Gautama actually taught. The teachings found in them have served as the fountainhead for all later Buddhist doctrine and practice. For this reason, they are the common heritage of the entire Buddhist tradition. Anyone wishing to understand the root of Buddhism should study them carefully. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha's discourses are preserved in collections called Nikayas. Over the past 20 years, new translations of the 4 major Nikayas have appeared. Wisdom Publications began this in 1987 with Maurice Walsh's translation of the Daya Nikaya, the Long Discourses of the Buddha. They followed with a revised edition of Bhikkhu Amolya's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Middle-Length Discourses of the Buddha, and later my translation of the Sayutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses of the Buddha, in 2000. An anthology of the Anguttara Nikaya followed in 1999. Many readers told me that these translations brought the suttas to life for them. Yet others, though appreciative, struggled to grasp the overall structure of the teachings. The Nikayas themselves offer little help in this regard. Their arrangement often appears haphazard, except for the Sayutta Nikaya, which has a thematic structure. In a series of lectures beginning in 2003, I devised a progressive scheme to organize the teachings of the Majjhima Nikaya, unfolding the Buddha's message from simple to profound. I later realized this scheme could be applied to all 4 Nikayas. The present book selects suttas from all 4 and arranges them within this thematic and progressive framework. This book is intended for 2 types of readers: newcomers who need a structured introduction, experienced readers who understand individual suttas but can't yet see the larger architecture. This anthology is not a substitute for the full Nikayas. My hope is, for beginners, that it inspires them to read more, and for experienced readers, that it improves their understanding of the whole structure of the Dhamma. Early Buddhism is often depicted as a path for monks only, but the ancient discourses show how deeply the Buddha addressed everyday life as well. Household life and monastic life supported each other. The Dhamma had to guide, comfort, inspire, and instruct people in both worldly duties and spiritual aspirations. Most passages in this book come from my published translations of the Nikayas, sometimes slightly revised to reflect my evolving understanding. A few are newly translated. A small number are taken from the Udana and Itivataka, two shorter collections, also revised. I have favored prose suttas, as they are more direct. When a sutta ends with verse repeating the prose, I have omitted the verse for space. Each chapter begins with an introduction explaining key concepts relevant to the theme. I include endnotes to clarify points, often drawing from the classical commentaries of Buddhaghosa. References to sources follow each selection, using standard formats so readers can find them in full translations. I am grateful to colleagues and students who encouraged, reviewed, and supported this work, and to Venerable Master Genshin of Bodhi Monastery for his openness and for fostering unity between the northern and southern traditions of early Buddhism. General Introduction. Though his teaching is highly systematic, there is no single text in which the Buddha defines the architecture of the Dhamma, the scaffolding upon which he framed his specific expressions of the doctrine. In the course of his long ministry, the Buddha taught in different ways, determined by occasion and circumstances. Sometimes he would enunciate invariable principles that stand at the heart of the teaching. Sometimes he would adapt the teaching to the aptitudes of the people who came to him for guidance. Sometimes he would adjust his exposition to fit a particular situation. But throughout the collections of texts that have come down to us as the Word of the Buddha, we do not find a single sutta, a single discourse, in which the Buddha has drawn together all elements of his teaching into a comprehensive system. In a literate culture, this might be viewed as a defect. But in an entirely oral culture, as was the culture in which the Buddha lived, the lack of a descriptive key to the Dhamma was hardly significant. Neither teacher nor student aimed at conceptual completeness. The aim was practical training, self-transformation, realization of truth, and unshakable liberation of the mind. This does not mean that the teaching was always adapted to circumstances. At times, the Buddha would present more panoramic views of the Dhamma, uniting many components of the path in a graded or wide-ranging structure. But even these broad discourses do not embrace all elements of the Dhamma in a single overarching scheme. The purpose of the present book is to develop and exemplify such a scheme. I attempt to provide a comprehensive picture of the Buddha's teaching, incorporating a wide variety of suttas into an organic structure that brings to light the intentional pattern underlying the Buddha's formulation of the Dhamma. I have selected the suttas almost entirely from the four major collections, or Nikayas, of the Pali Canon, though I have also included a few texts from the Udana and Itivataka, two small books of the fifth collection, the Khaddaka Nikaya. Each chapter opens with its own introduction, explaining the basic concepts of early Buddhism that the texts exemplify and showing how the text expressed these ideas. Although my use of this scheme may be original, it is based upon a threefold distinction that the Pali commentaries make among the types of benefits to which the practice of the Dhamma leads: welfare and happiness visible in this present life, welfare and happiness pertaining to future lives, the ultimate good, Nibbana. 3 preliminary chapters lead up to those embodying this threefold scheme. Chapter 1 surveys the human condition apart from the appearance of a Buddha. It presents a world in which people are driven helplessly toward old age and death, oppressed by bodily pain, misfortune, and change. People aspire to harmony, yet untamed emotions often compel conflict and suffering. Sentient beings are propelled by ignorance, and craving from one life to the next, wandering blindly through the cycle of rebirth called samsara. Chapter 2 gives an account of the Buddha's descent into this world as the one person who arises out of compassion. It follows the story of his conception and birth, renunciation, quest for enlightenment, realization of the Dhamma, and decision to teach, ending with his first discourse to the 5 monks in the Deer Park near Benares. Chapter 3 sketches the special features of the Buddha's teaching and the attitude with which a prospective student should approach it. The Dhamma is not secret or esoteric. It does not demand blind faith in scriptures, divine revelations, or dogmas, but invites investigation and personal experience as the ultimate criterion. The teaching concerns the arising and cessation of suffering, observable in one's own experience. It does not set up even the Buddha as an unquestionable authority, but encourages examination of him to determine whether he deserves trust. It also provides a step-by-step method for testing the teaching and realizing truth for oneself. Chapter 4 deals with the first type of benefit, the welfare and happiness visible in this present life. This happiness comes from following ethical norms in family, livelihood, and communal life. Early Buddhism, often depicted as radical renunciation, also promotes social harmony, evident in teachings on duties to parents, mutual obligations of spouses, right livelihood, and communal ethics. Chapter 5 covers the second type of benefit, welfare and happiness pertaining to future lives. This happiness is achieved by a fortunate rebirth and success in future lives through the accumulation of merit. Merit refers to wholesome karma capable of producing favorable results within the cycle of rebirths. The chapter begins with texts on karma and rebirth, followed by the three principal bases of merit recognized in the Buddha's discourses: giving, moral discipline, and meditation. Meditation here is that which produces abundant mundane fruits, especially the development of the four divine abodes, with a focus on loving-kindness. Chapter 6 is transitional, preparing the way for the ultimate goal. While showing that following the teaching brings happiness in this life, the Buddha exposes the dangers and inadequacies of all conditioned existence. Sensual pleasures, material success, impermanence, and death are shown to be unsatisfactory. This chapter climaxes with texts highlighting the misery of bondage to the cycle of birth and death. Chapters 7 through X focus on the third benefit, the ultimate good, Nibbana. Chapter 7 provides an overview of the path to liberation through definitions of the Noble Eightfold Path and the training of the monk. Chapter 8 emphasizes the taming of the mind, obstacles to mental development, methods of meditation, and mastery of the mind, introducing the distinction between samatha, serenity, and vipassana, insight. Chapter 9, Shining the Light of Wisdom, addresses the content of insight, including right view, the five aggregates, the six sense bases, the 18 elements, dependent origination, and the Four Noble Truths. It concludes with texts on Nibbana. Chapter 10, The Planes of Realization, presents the stages from worldling to arahant, highlighting three major milestones: stream entry, non-returner, and arahantship, concluding with texts on the Buddha, the Tathagata. The origins of the Nikayas. The texts used in this book are drawn from the Nikayas, the main sutta collections of the Pali Canon. Some background is necessary. The Buddha did not write down his teachings, nor were they recorded in writing by his disciples. Indian culture at the time was predominantly oral. The Buddha wandered from town to town, instructing monks and nuns, giving sermons to householders, answering questions, and engaging in discussions across society. The records we have come from monastic councils held after the Buddha's passing, parinibbana, intended to preserve his teaching. They do not reproduce the Buddha's words verbatim. He spoke spontaneously, adapting to his audience, which required simplification and standardization for memorization, recitation, and retention, the five major elements of oral transmission. During his life, discourses were classified into 9 genres: prose discourses, mixed prose and verse, answers to questions, verse, inspired utterances, memorable sayings, stories of past lives, marvelous qualities, and catechisms. After his passing, this system was replaced by the larger collections called Nikayas in the Theravada tradition, and Agamas in northern schools. The Kulavagga, a book of the Vinaya Pitaka, describes the first Buddhist council, held 3 months after the Buddha's passing, at Rajagaha. Elder Mahakassapa selected 500 monks, all arahants, to compile authoritative texts. Venerable Upali recited the Vinaya, forming the Vinaya Piyaka. Venerable Ananda recited the discourses, forming the Sutta Piyaka. According to tradition, the Nikayas had the same contents and order as today. The agamas of other schools correspond to the 4 Nikayas but classify and arrange suttas differently, suggesting the Nikayagama scheme may have evolved over time, possibly after the first council. Ananda, the Buddha's personal attendant, played a central role in preserving the discourses. He had learned the teachings from the Buddha and other disciples and taught them to others. Individual monks specialized in texts, and standardization facilitated memorization. Once classified into Nikayas or Agamas, transmission continued through dedicated groups of textual specialists, ensuring preservation for several centuries until the texts were committed to writing. Over the next few centuries, the saga divided into at least 18 schools. Each sect likely had its own canonical texts, though suttas were often similar across schools. Doctrinal differences arose not from the suttas themselves but from interpretive commentaries, which were often defensive or apologetic, yet the original teachings remained largely intact. The Pali Canon. Sadly, the canonical collections of most early Indian Buddhist schools were lost when Muslim invasions devastated northern India in the 11th and 12th centuries. These invasions effectively ended Buddhism in its land of origin. Only one complete collection survived intact, the collection preserved in the language we now call Pali. This belonged to the ancient Theravada school, which had been transplanted to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BC and thus escaped the destruction in India. Around the same time, the Theravada spread to Southeast Asia and eventually became dominant throughout the region. The Pali Canon is the collection that the Theravada regards as the word of the Buddha, or Buddhavacana. The survival of this single canon does not imply that all its texts are from the same period, nor that its most archaic portions are necessarily older than texts from other Buddhist schools, some of which survive in Chinese or Tibetan translation or as isolated texts in other Indian languages. Nevertheless, the Pali Canon is especially important for 3 reasons. First, it is a complete collection belonging to a single school. Despite signs of historical development between portions, this alignment gives the texts a degree of uniformity. Among texts from the same period, there is a recognizable homogeneity of content, a single flavor underlying the manifold expressions of the doctrine. This is most evident in the 4 Nikayas and the older parts of the 5th Nikaya, suggesting that these texts represent the most ancient stratum of Buddhist literature discoverable. Second, the collection has been preserved in a Middle Indo-Aryan language closely related to the dialects the Buddha himself likely spoke. We call this language Pali, though the term arose from a misunderstanding. Pali properly means text, as distinct from commentaries. The commentators referred to the language as Paibasa, the language of the texts. Over time, this term was misunderstood as the name of the language itself, and the misconception has persisted. Scholars regard Pali as a hybrid of several Prakrit dialects, subjected to partial Sanskritization. While not identical to the language the Buddha spoke, it belongs to the same broad linguistic family and conceptual matrix, capturing the nuances of the Indian cultural and philosophical world without the distortions inherent in translations into Chinese, Tibetan, or English. Third, the Pali Canon remains authoritative for a living Buddhist school. Unlike the textual collections of extinct schools, it is still vibrant, inspiring millions of Buddhists in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Southeast Asia, and even meditation centers in Europe and the Americas. It guides understanding, ethical choices, meditative practices, and the pursuit of liberating insight. The Pali Canon is commonly known as the Tipiyaka, or 3 baskets. This threefold division was widely used among Indian Buddhist schools and persists in Chinese translations as the Chinese Tripiyaka. The 3 compilations are Vinaya Piyaka, the compilation of discipline, containing rules for monks and nuns and regulations for harmonious monastic life. Sutta Piyaka, the compilation of discourses, containing the Buddha's discourses, those of his chief disciples, inspirational verses, verse narratives, and some works of a commentarial nature. Abhidhamma Piyaka, the compilation of philosophy, 7 treatises systematizing the Buddha's teachings. This represents a later stage of Buddhist thought. Other early schools also had Abhidhamma systems, but only the Sarvastivada Abhidharma survives in full, in Chinese translation, differing significantly from the Theravada system. The Sutta Piyaka itself consists of 5 Nikayas, also known as Agamas in Northern Buddhism. The 4 major Nikayas are Daya Nikaya, the collection of long discourses, 34 suttas arranged into 3 books. Majjhima Nikaya, the collection of middle-length discourses, 152 suttas in 3 books. Sayutta Nikaya, the collection of connected discourses, nearly 3,000 short suttas grouped into 56 chapters, called sayuttas, then collected into 5 books. Anguttara Nikaya, the collection of numerical discourses, about 2,400 short suttas arranged into 11 chapters, or nipatas. At first glance, Daya and Majjhima Nikayas seem organized by length, long discourses in Daya, middle length in Majjhima. However, the Daya Nikaya largely addresses a popular audience, attracting converts by demonstrating the Buddha's superiority, while the Majjhima Nikaya is directed toward the monastic community, introducing new monks to doctrines and practices. Whether length or pragmatic purpose was the primary organizing factor remains debated. The Sayutta Nikaya is organized by subject. Each subject, or yoke sayoga, connects the discourses into chapters. The first book with verses, is arranged by literary genre, containing mixed prose and verse in 11 chapters. Books 2 to 4 open with chapters devoted to dependent origination, the 5 aggregates, and the 6 internal and external sense bases, respectively. Book V deals with training factors later called the 37 Aids to Enlightenment, including the Noble Eightfold Path, the 7 Factors of Enlightenment, and the 4 Establishments of Mindfulness. The Sayutta Nikaya served both doctrinal specialists and meditators developing insight. The Anguttara Nikaya is arranged numerically, reflecting the Buddha's pedagogical method of grouping teachings into sets for easy memorization. It comprises 11 chapters, each corresponding to numbers 1 through 11. This Nikaya emphasizes teachings not included in repetitive sets elsewhere and contains many suttas addressed to lay followers on ethical and spiritual life, as well as monastic training. Its numerical structure made it convenient for instruction and sermons. The fifth Nikaya, the Khuddaka Nikaya, or minor collection, originally consisted of small works not included in the 4 major Nikayas. Over time, additional works were added, making it the most voluminous of the Nikayas. At its core are ancient works in verse, such as the Dhammapada, Theragatha, and Therigatha, and mixed prose-verse works, including the Satanapada, Yudana, and Itivataka. Other texts, like the Paisambhidmagga and the Nadisas, reflect the Theravada school's later doctrinal development. The 4 Nikayas correspond to the agamas of the Chinese Tripitaka, though stemming from different schools, Durgagama, probably from the Dharmaguptaka school, translated from Prakrit. Madhyamagama and Sayukagama, from the Sarvastivada school, translated from Sanskrit. Ekadaragama, corresponding to Anguttara Nikaya, likely from a Maskika branch, translated from Middle Indo-Aryan or mixed Prakrit Sanskrit. Chinese Tripitaka also preserves individual sutras and books from the minor collection, including 2 versions of the Dhammapada and parts of the Satanapada, which does not survive as a unified work in Chinese.